to show you how you can use your networking skills in setting up your FTP server. So that's 6.2 along with file storage server. This is super important, and then it's going to come back to DNS and all of that we already done. So okay, and you can definitely do this lab from home. I wanted to keep the first one kind of where you can do some of this if you have Windows, and then we will go into more of like the server stuff on the second day. In a couple of weeks we are going to work on the router. So both of the days we're going to spend the time doing that, because it does take a little bit of time to kind of get things set up. But before that, I think I wanted to use like the form of packet tracer to kind of give you a little bit of understanding on how to program it. Okay, so understanding the commands and the command line and all of that. So you will have, and I do have a routing switching class, which is following this one. I might offer it in the spring. I do have faculty now that can teach those things, and they are Cisco certified. So, that's a plus. All right. This lab, it talks about ARP, and I wanted to pull this because in the book, it gives you a little bit of information. But in your field, you really work with ARP, especially in cybersecurity. And so here it talks about the protocol in general. We got this from the textbook already. This is a way that we can map procedure to the IP and MAC address, okay? And so ARP is just for IP and MAC address, but you do have different types of ARP. You have proxy, which is for the proxy device that's given the network for the request. So you can assign a role for your proxy ARP, and you do see some proxy servers in charge of this. Fortuitous is going to be mainly for announcing and update. So it's working more on like multicast and broadcast level. And then you have the reserve, just like all the other protocol, you can reserve ARP, which is RARP. And this is going to be the host machine that do not know their IP address. So you can set up the RARP. And then the inverse ARP is used with IP address to find the MAC. So instead of MAC to IP, we would do IP to MAC. So it's just a reverse way, and it keeps record of that. So now, just to highlight some of the things, right? ARP is used quite a bit in networking and in cybersecurity, and there's flaws in all of these protocols, as you know. So it would be that the administrator would maintain a table or the directory, and you would need to really monitor your protocol because there are some weaknesses in the protocol. You know that ARP poisoning is, or DNS poisoning is common, and then some of the other areas that you would see. So we already done some of this, so I just want to review it. So let's open up command prompt. But when you open up command prompt, I like for you to use, let me share screen, to use it as the administrator. So when you search for CMD, okay, you're going to right click and then you're going to run as administrator, because some of the commands, it is an escalated privileges, right? It's in the higher privilege. And I had my class last night in CIS-45. So when you refer to privilege, it's going to be user rights and system rights. So when we say rights, those are the tasks that would relate to the particular user actions and systems. So such as shut down the computer, restart a service, enable certain configuration. When you deal with permissions, that will be files and objects, folders, okay? So people mix them up and they shouldn't. So when we run it as an administrator, we have much higher privilege. So let me change my property to a larger font here so you can see. Actually, I'm going to make it bigger. Okay. So if we do an ARP A, and you can also use ARP G, what this will give us is the list. And you would see that there would be a physical address column. This is gonna be for align with your IP address, okay? We saw this before. Now, you're gonna have interface, okay? And then you are gonna have different interface that will be listed. So at this, you know, that we, in the past, we talk about frames and data frames, and it relies on the physical address. So when we see the physical address as this, right, because it's using hexadecimal, right? F is when all the bits are on, and then you notice that on the 255, that's when all the bits are on. That's all broadcast right there. Okay, those are non-usable address. But in the case where we're looking at something like this, okay, then we would see that would be relevant to a MAC address. So this is an IP and this is its MAC. And then it will tell you whether it's static, that means that we manually put it in, or dynamic, where the server service that particular IP, okay? And then so that will give you the table. So here, we would see that there will be some, so the interfaces, I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, depending on the system, when you work with the server, there will be more. So I can just say 4 interface. And if you are specific, right, you can list them, but for this, we just want you to know where to find information. So now we are going to do a flush. D stands for delete. So if you want to clear it, you can do an ARP D. And it would not give you anything, right? There's no confirmation in command line. Now, I'm going to warn you, this command sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So ideally, it's supposed to flush everything. Okay, that's the ideal perspective. So after we flush it, if we do A again, right, it should have less. Okay, what it did get rid of is all the broadcast address that you see. You see that on there? Now all the FFFs have gone away. Okay, so it did clear up some for us. Okay, so what you can do is you need to understand that if you need to size it down and clean up all the addresses, then you can flush it and then look at all the configuration again. So in step 3, we do a flush, and I put the command here so you know what they're doing, what it's doing. And then if you do ARP G with the option G, right, you are gonna get something very close to A. Okay, it is gonna output your ARP table, okay, or your ARP listing again. So all that is just a temporary storage, a cache information about your system or the connected system in that you're connected to. Okay, so that is it the same? Pretty much. So you can say yes. All right, next one. Okay, so we are gonna repeat the ARP cache. If it's clear, did it clear? I would put that it removed broadcast addresses, but it retained, right, the system address, IP and MAC. We want to make a note of that because, you know, when you're working with command, you might have a certain expectation. And so if, you know, if you got to make sure that you know that sometimes it doesn't always clear it. Okay. Now, we don't want to always flush it. We want to rely on it so that way if the connection has already been established, it stores it so that way it can reuse that information so it doesn't have to seek it again, right? So therefore, that's why you don't see a lot of these things being cleared, because if it's regularly used in the network, we want to use that information to be able to, you know, keep our connection going. So another command that you can use is a way to be able to set your manual, and you can use your IP address, right? And in here we can say IP config /all. And so we would go to the adapter. Sorry, let me find my connection 5 here. Oh, that's not it. It usually is really good at, okay, yeah, my Ethernet 6. So here is my IP, okay? And then the version 4 is listed as preferred. And in this network, they don't use too much of the version 6. We already learned that. And then the physical. So when you set when you set your entry, you can put in an IP address, okay? And then your MAC address. So you can try that and let me know if it works or doesn't work. You can take a screen capture. We should be able to set it. Okay, check. 10.151. Let me type it down. So. Oh, it's 101. Okay, and then my MAC is so E8. And you can copy and paste it over, but I'm just typing it down so I know. 85 84 BB66. And then 7A. Okay, so you're gonna plug this field into here and then your IP into here. And you can use another IP and MAC. Okay. So this is a manual way to set ARP. Let's say you want to store that information associated with your IP address and your MAC. You can set it. Okay. And then for the next one, I want you to find your host name, and you will do that throughout. So let me get my host name. So the host name simply tells us our computer name, right? We've seen this already before. Why is that important? Because sometimes we can actually use the host name to find the system, to look at its connection, okay? So that's my host name. And then we are going to do a pathing with the loopback. So loopback, just what it does is it's going to bring it back to that particular system. So your system, when you do a path ping is similar to trace route. Okay, and all system call home. So when this is a local host address, it's going to see itself as that address. And then while it's also having another IP address that's given by the DHCP. So I always call this the boomerang address. So it's going to come right back to that system or system call home, right? You see those t-shirts where it says 127.0.0.0 home sweet home, right? That's a joke. That's a nod to the networkers, right? So that's going to be, this is going to come right back to your system. So if we do a path ping 127.0.0.1 and make sure that you know your loopback address for network plus. So we would see, and the reason why I have you identify your host name is that it would show, right? I am only one hop from myself, right? That's okay. That's right, because you connect to yourself. So the way the system sees it is that it's gonna be one hop to itself. Okay. And then it's gonna try to compute the statistic. It might go for a little bit longer than 25 seconds. Now you can do path ping with any IP. You can path ping a server. We can do a path ping to, so if the system responds, what you're doing is it tells you what path pings mean. So you can do a host name or you can do an IP address. This is the maximum that it's gonna go is gonna be 5 minutes. So don't be surprised if it's 25 seconds or longer. And it's gonna gather the statistic. It's gonna give you the latency and the packet loss statistic. This is important when you're troubleshooting connectivity. So if we are looking to see if a certain system is not responding, we can do a ping or we can do a path ping, okay? And then, so I can answer this now that it's showing only one hop. You should only be one hop to yourself. And the hop is usually represented as a router, okay? And you'd be surprised in some network, the way they design it is that, so I used to work for a company that they had sent everything to corporate office first. So even when you ping, sometime that your packet is going to go to their centralized systems, right? And then it's going to screen all the traffic and it's going to come back a little slow. But what happened is they have all of the security things, appliances that's implemented. So even internally in your local area network at one segment, it actually gets routed to their corporate office, which is elsewhere. And then it's going to come back. So when you, in that case, when you trace it, or when you do a path ping, it actually shows multiple hops, okay? But in most network, you're going to see one hop because it's no point to connect to other system and then come right back to where you are. It's kind of like saying, go put stuff in your room and you're already in your room. It doesn't make sense to run outside and come back in your room. It doesn't, right? That's just a waste of bandwidth, but that was the way that they designed it originally. And so, so rarely you see that's the case. Okay. Then does the input contain your system name from number 7? Yes, right? Because you are looking at your own system using the loopback address. Okay, so this is going to go a little bit. And then after that, we are going to do NetBios stat. Okay, so this command uses NetBios, which we talked about that a couple weeks ago. And this is going to be the NetBios name. So when you set up your DNS at the end, you have to set up your wins, right? And that's used for your net viewing, NetBios. So instead of looking for the IP, it will just look for the system name. And Windows environment, you're going to see a lot of that, right? Because they design it to work with the older Windows, even though we know that Windows 7 is, probably is being phased out anyway. And all the other older Windows like XP and things like that's gone because they don't support it anymore and people have to upgrade. So you're going to see, and so what you can do is you can do an NBT stat -R. That's going to show you how many NetBios name the device has been able to resolve in, so it cached that information as well. Okay, so you can also look at that. And then it's going to also give you the registered broadcast and the registered for the name server. And this works with your wins, right? And also that could be a role concurrent with the DNS. Okay, so it's resolving by name. Okay. I'm just going really slow. What about you? Did you get any result? Yeah, I should have saved path ping. So for the last part, 'cause this is gonna go forever. Okay. So we're gonna come back to 9. Okay, we're gonna let command prompt do its thing for now. And then sometime they, that I think they're blocking pathing. Okay, so that's why it's checking policy, right? So when you see something like that, that's not uncommon to say that, your Windows, there's Windows firewall or there's some kind of policy rules against pathing because, all as an attacker, you would then look for information like this, right? Stuff about the system. Okay, so let's do PowerShell. We're gonna come back to 9. And then you are gonna search for PowerShell. And I want you to use it as administrator again. So run as admin. And let me increase the font size. Okay, so here I am. It should tell you the path, very similar to what you see in command prompt, right? We've seen this before. We've used PowerShell before. So what I want you to do is for the ARP side of the house, we can use the get neighbor. It is similar to what you see with ARP. So here it tells you that it creates the neighbor cache entry, and the neighbor cache maintains the information for each of the on-link neighbor, including IP address and associate link layer address. And the link layer address is pertaining to either the IPv6 link layer or your MAC, okay? And the address family that's specified with the neighbor cache entry must match the address family for the IP interface. So again, right, it's gonna maintain this table, and this table is gonna have your link address and your IP address, and that's how it's able to associate system connection, okay? It's kind of like a phone directory where you would have a name to a phone and then an address to that phone number. So then if I need to find anybody in that neighborhood, like back in the day, people would use yellow pages, and then they just look up the first and last name and it would have the name and the phone number and the address. So we designed the system to be just like us. Whatever we use, that's how our system is going to be functioning. So that's how we're able to establish communication. So we can copy this command, and then it's going to give you a lot of stuff, okay? We can't do a control V at this moment, so let's type it, I guess. Get net neighbor. Sure, I have the syntax here. Okay, so all of these things are being kept. And you see your link layer address, see that? That's your MAC. And then you also have some IPv6. You notice that it gives you the state unreachable, right? And then there's something that's permanent, that means that it's stored. And then stale, that means that it's no longer used. Okay, so unreachable, it means it can't resolve it. Okay, so this is a way, and unlike what you see with ARP, ARP is, the table format for it is a little bit different. So I want to show you how this you can look in PowerShell, where you can look at your connected neighbor. And then you have the index and then your IP address. And so now the policy store, it's using the active store. So that's just how it's storing the information. And that can also be configured, okay? So I only have a few that are state that's reachable. I have this one, okay? And then I have this one. And so you kind of see that you do see people from or systems in the same network, okay? And then you also see the external. So as the probe, we also see the probe here, okay? And that's a router that's probing your gateway. I can tell this is a .1, Okay, the admin here at RCCD, they are, you know, they practice the traditional concept with networking, so. Which is what most people should do. Okay, so there's what you would see. And then you can just take a screen capture, doesn't have to be everything. How many entries are stale and unreachable? So I have, you can do a guesstimate. So I have 3 here on stale. And then I have another, what, 5, so 8. So I have a total of 8. So stale. 8 entries. And then for your unreachable, sorry, the typo there. Unreachable, we have 2, 4, 5, another 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, so 35. Now, what can we do with this information? Well, if the addresses had gone stale, right? And if you're using those systems, so you want to check on those. What are stale and what are unreachable, because there might be some of your system trying to connect to something that's no longer there, or it's just not working. So we wanted to check those. And then on this one, you are going to do the get neighbor and you're gonna pipe it. So this is gonna get all the neighbor entries again, and it's gonna display the properties in the output. So unlike the other one, you're gonna get a little bit more information using the format list property. Okay. Yeah.
Shows stale, that means that the networks are not in use or they don't work.
Well, that one is, yeah, it's not responding. And yeah, so what happened is this one, it could be that because it's using dynamic host control protocol, right? It's using an IP address that's assigned, so it might have been associated with a different IP already. So it was there, but it's not used anymore. Okay, and then unreachable just means that it's not responding. So and then eventually we can clear some of these out, right? It's gonna flush it out, it's gonna write over those areas. But what we can see is at this moment, right, which ones are unreachable. And some of the stuff is like, you know, broadcast. And then some of the things like this one is a broadcast, and then that's permanent. So it stores that because it would then continuously use. So some of this is no longer really usable, right? And then some of it is unreachable, just mean that it can't associate it with anything that's connected. So all right, so let's do the next one, which is your get neighbor, get net neighbor. And then we are gonna pipe it, and I think it's a format list property, right? With the while. Yeah, with the while part. Error, so space. Did you get anything from that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having, did I type it wrong? Get net neighbor format list. Format list space. I did put a space and it didn't like it. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it didn't cooperate earlier. But maybe it's just, it's a user error, like my husband would say. Stop blaming on the computer. Okay, so a lot of stuff. You can see that there is interface. So your IP config all also got dumped into here, along with your last one that you saw, which is get net neighbor. So what it did was it took every single interface and it expanded on the property of that interface, right? Including some of the status information and everything else. So now, right, if we're looking for a certain things, and this is why you can write a script and you can dig into it, or we can on the Linux side, I think Linux is beautiful in that you can grep it and then you can find a keyword quickly compared to Windows, right, where it's searching for a certain term or certain things is a little harder, especially when you have massive data like this. Okay, or you can find ways to export it out to CSV and then sort it. Okay, but this kind of show you that it does. And if you do look into their documentation, you will find that there are ways to really use the parameter to really sense it down, right? I'm only using where it gives you everything. You can also specify on what you want to find in PowerShell. Okay, so you just gotta go a little longer with the command. So how is it different than the last one, right? It provides, so it displays more details, especially like properties of interface, right? Connection status, and so on. You get the idea. Now, while PowerShell documentation has a lot of different things, you know that some of the things, if it doesn't exist in your network, it will not work because it's going to find that object. And if that object is not stored, right, it won't be able to give you any kind of output. It's going to throw an error. It's going to say, oh, I'm looking for something that doesn't exist. So, as it execute that function, it's going to look for the data for that function. And so if your network is not designed to have certain objects, then certain command doesn't work. Okay. So like, for example, like get NAT, if you're trying to do NAT in a home network that doesn't have NAT, it doesn't work, right? But if you run that on a regular enterprise network, it works because that object exists. I was trying to test that earlier and I was like, I don't know if I should put this on the lab for them but anyway, you can practice. Okay, then if we want only IPv6, we can try to use the next command. And so my system just started. There it is. No, I don't want that. Get net neighbor. And that will be address family. It's not letting me control V. There it is. Okay, so if you want to quickly find the IPv6, like I said, you can probably, if you want IPv4, you put in IPv4 as the address family. That's the parameter that Microsoft uses. IPv6 will be this. Okay, so this will give us all the IPv6. So some of the suffix you're gonna find in this network is gonna be FF02, right? That's the beginning. And then your FE80. So those are the two I think they're using. So the FF80. And then you have the FF02. Okay, now we can filter down to things that are reachable and your net adapter that is reachable. See, it's remembering my last copy. So let's try it again. So here, what it's doing is going to tell you, right? This is my adapter, which is my network interface card. And the status is up, it's running. Okay, so this is a good command to use if you want to see if the system is connected or not. The link speed, it tells you how fast it's transferring data in the network, and then your MAC address. Okay, so here it just tells me that this is my adapter that I'm using, and then, you know, what it is and so on.
So when you put it back to that, like it's like a second input.
Yeah, so it's a filter. It's a filter element.
So I guess the first get neighbor. So the first one versus get that neighbor with the person that after it's like get that after.
Yes. So you can also, this is optional, right? Because in the get neighbor, it actually lists your interface. And so what we're doing is we are using, this is also another command, you know that, right? So what we can do is we can add that as an option for the first one. So it's gonna able to also get the information that's reachable and then tie the adapter to it, the interface to it, okay? So it's a way that we can filter it. And yes, you can use the pipe to be able to add the additional parameter for certain things that you're looking for, assuming that it's already contained in the first list. Okay, all right. So here is this, and I have 3. So how many entries are displayed? I just want you to just check it out and see what it looks like, okay? And when you test it at home, it's gonna be a little different when you're using multiple adapters. That's gonna be different. Okay. All right, any other questions?
So basically, get that neighbor, sorry, to just check who's on our network.
Yeah, so what it's gonna do is it's gonna be who's around, right? Who's connected to who. Usually it's from your system to them, okay? If you're on the internet, you also see external, okay? Because it's routed out. And then if you're only on the local area network, then you will see the internal network. Yeah, so.
Sorry. So with, like, let's just say, you know, I'm like security analysis, and that's really important to manage who's on the network, or can.
Well, yeah, you wanted to see, you also wanted to see who's really there and then who are people connecting to. But when you run it from system to system, right? Like if Jarrell is on, you know, other websites and other web servers, he's connected to that. It's going to show a little bit different than what I have, as I am connected to other web servers myself, right? So you do see various, and so and we would use a network monitoring tool to see what's going on for everybody. But if you are looking to do some, you know, investigation, like you suspect that there might be some breach issue going on with certain system, this is probably a good one to also use. Not just to keep status, but to also see, you know, and for security, we care about availability and, you know, how that system is used, how it's secured, and so on. Okay, so we already looked at so this kind of gives you a little taste on how to use getNetNeighbor. And then when you start doing routing, you're gonna start seeing more on how the router sees its neighbor, how it's seeing its hop. Okay, so here's some review stuff from TCP and UDP. TCP, I want to highlight that it does have vulnerability, even though it is reliable. DDoS is one of the area, and hijacking and veto and reset attack. So those are the type of attack that capitalize on TCP. And then your user datagram, there are other type of attacks, but you know, UDP is very lightweight, it's connectionless, it's fast, right? But it's unreliable. And UDP is used for a lot of things, including your DNS. So when a system is joining a domain or it's looking for connecting that to that domain, it uses UDP. And UDP is prevalent, and that's what we saw in the network monitoring lab session that we had. But the type of attack that you see with UDP is going to be flood, DNS implications, and port scan. So whenever they run port scan, you can see them using UDP. Okay, because they're going to look at the type of UDP port that you're using and then use it. Okay, because it's weak compared to other protocol. Okay, so here I wanted to show you that you can use PowerShell to get your TCP connection. So we are going to do a net TCP connection. Copy again. Okay, so it's going to give you a lot, but this is just all TCP or the protocol that's under the TCP category. Okay, so you are going to have listen state, and then there is some local port being used here. And then you are going to have bound and close way and establish. So you know that TCP does three-way handshake. It's got to listen and say who's connecting, right? And then once it's established, it has to do the SYNAC where it's going to say, okay, I'm connected with you. Now let's communicate. So you would see the state happening throughout when you look at this, okay? And using this command on PowerShell, you would also be able to see systems. This is me right here, okay? The port, and then this is an HTTPS port. So that's a web one. So it's waiting and it tells you which one is the internet, okay? So here I'm trying to communicate with the web server, right? And then the web server respond and said here, right, like Canvas or something like that. And so once it's established, you would see it again. So it would say establish internet. But now this is port 80, which is not secure. So you see some common ports happening in this column, and then you have the local ports happening here. Okay. So it lists that. So you can see the status of the connection on the TCP side. This is what Wireshark pulls anyway, okay? All right. Okay, so how many entries have closed wait state? Just give me a guesstimate. That looks like what? 2, 4, 6, 8, 8, 10. When you do this at home, it's less. So 10 on mine. And then we wanted to also filter it down to only the one that's connected, that's established. Okay. And so if we're only looking at the established and we took out the listen and the close wait and all of the other stuff, we only have these. And this is gonna, you know, usually it's internet, or when you're connecting directly to that system, like, you know, remote connection with RDP or something like that. So here's my system, right? I'm using the local port, I'm using 443, so HTTPS. And then I also have a loop back right there. Okay, so here it lists, it filters it down for you. So compared to 11A, are there less entries listed? Sure, of course, right? So yes. It displays the established entries. So that's how you can filter it down. If you wanted to do, other type of state, you can specify it, like what we did here. Like if I wanted to look at the listen, I can put in the listen there, or the close wait. Okay, then we are going to use the applied setting. So here what you see is the column is the applied setting. You see that? That column. So now we're going to filter it down to just that column. And we're interested in the applied setting that has the internet. Now, so that means that it's going to also include the stuff that's the traffic that comes back from the web server, right? Like while it waits, when it's established, and so on. So what you can see is you can see that it's, there's confirmation process happening before you get established. Okay. So the remote port is your normal common port. And then your local port, these are in the higher range. Okay. All right. And we can tell based on the port number what type of services it's running. Usually it's 80 and 443. Okay. Except for the loopback, it uses the local port range. The same. See that on the loopback? Okay. Then what are the remote port listed? So I have port 80 and 443. And I'm not going to list the loopback one because that's the same as the local port. Write down 3 commonly listed owning process values. I wanted to do this so that way you can do the next one. Okay. So those are going to be on the right side. So if you see some that's going to be repeating, like this one, 13904, you want to put those down because it's easier for you to do the next one. So that will be 13904. And if you don't have that service established and you're trying to use that number, it's going to give you an error. And then I'm going to make another one. Let's do 6760. Let me put on this computer and it's Google. Okay. Let's see what other one. 14032. So you're gonna ask, right? So I knew that if you record this, you're gonna say, well, what is the really owning process? All processes in your system have some kind of ID, and it's a way that it can use it to track, right? And that ID will pertain to the task or the function in that application or software. Your OS does it, so any type of service, we want to also have some kind of way to track our process. And so when you're using the next command, when you're doing the get, right, the get TCP connection, and you do an owning process and you put in that process number, what that will do is it's going to identify that particular active process based on the number that you tell it. Okay. So this number is used in function calls, and it allows the process to be manipulated by adjusting the process priority or killing it. So in some case in networking where it would be timeout, eventually that process would be killed. So in your OS, the way that it communicates is that, or it uses the process is that your process ID is being put onto a list. And what that list does is it's gonna assign the priority based on that. So if I'm using a browser and I'm putting in a URL, right, there are multiple processes that's happening for my application. So in that case, so one of the process would be connectivity that would be related to TCP. And this is where you would see the owning process comes into play, right? The confirmation with the communication established. So once it's already been done, right, it's gonna take it off of the priority list, and then it's gonna eventually remove that. It's gonna dissolve that because it no longer needs to execute that process again. So what they did was we used a process ID to be able to track what needs to be executed and then what needs to be queued. So you have a priority list and you have a queue list. So it's going to take care of the processes that's on the priority list first, and then resolve all of the requests there, and then it's going to put in the queue into the priority, and it's going to do that. So all of this is happening, and this is when you start tracking your processes in your task manager, or if you looking at task lists, it's going to see all of that too. So with connection, we're always going to have some kind of process happening there. Okay, so I'm going to use this one, and then I'm going to use 13904 and see, but you can use others. Okay, so it's gonna now only filter it down to this owning process, and then I can see, what type of system that will, or what kind of addresses and the things that are related to it, the ports and so on. So why is this important? Well, in the case if you have DDoS, you have that established connection directly with the attacker does that to the system, right? Or distributed, they would have a lot of different connections from zombies or systems that they take over, and it's going to launch the attack. Okay, so you can actually see how your system is responding to those requests based on your process ID and based on, right, your addresses. Okay. So this is another way that we can dive a little deeper by looking at the data on the network for a specific system and a specific type of process. Okay, how many entries has established the internet state? So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9, and yours might be a little different. Okay, all right, next one. We are going to do get net UDP endpoint. So UDP, you don't see a lot of stuff for UDP on PowerShell. They're like a little section for it. We would see a lot more on TCP, okay, because a lot of times UDP is a little harder to track as a process, and also because it's connectionless and it comes whenever it comes. So here. So when we're looking at the endpoints, and the UDP header has less field, so it's not going to give you a lot of stuff, okay, compared to TCP. TCP has a lot of field where it's going to track everything. On the UDP, you are going to have the source, destination, some port information, and then it does a little bit of the checksum. That's all. So you are not going to get a lot of details, only going to be the addresses, right, and the ports. So that's what we're going to get. Okay, so here it talks about it's going to give you the statistic for the UDP endpoint. It returns the property such as your local remote ports, and then if you don't specify anything, it's just going to give you the overall statistic for your UDP traffic. So when I do this, I basically skim down my UDP traffic for my system. That's what I'm doing. Okay, and then you can drill down on the ports that's using, right? For specific ports, if you're thinking that that port, that service might be something that would create vulnerability on the network. All right. So identify the ports that are associated. Oh wait, yeah. You don't have to write down everything. Okay. You can, so here, this one, I'm gonna do the 1900. But you do see a lot of, so this is mine again, right? Those are the local, some of the local ports, and then you have some of the common ports. Okay. All right, now we are gonna do the local address and we're gonna look at the loopback. I spent a lot of time on PowerShell is because you've used command line in other classes and also in this class before. We've done ping and trace route and stuff like that. So I want to introduce this more so that way you have a little bit more practice. So here it gives me 3 entries, right? I have the loopback address and then it's also showing the local port. Okay, we talked about loopback already. So how many entries? I have 3. And then we are going to look at the UDP settings. And this is going to give you all the dynamic port ranges. So it's going to give you the port ranges that it's using for UDP. So if you wanted to know, the type of ports that it's used, you would use this one. Okay, so that is the start, and then this is the number of ports that's using. So that just gives you the summary of the ports. And ports is one of the things that we work with a lot, right? Especially in cybersecurity. So you have to be familiar with like what kind of ports, what services to that port. Okay. So now in the next one is going to be ICMP, and this is used for ping. Okay. So this, just to give you a little bit of background there, network devices and routers, it uses ICMP. Sometimes they disable this because, it can cause failure in the network. But we would use it in the ping or trace route. Okay. Now you can use a command called test connection. So this command is going to use ICMP and it's going to do echo and request. This is the same way that it would be pings. Okay, so you're going to do echo, you're going to send it, and then in Windows it's 4 times, but in Linux it goes forever with ping. Okay, unless you count it, you put the count parameter in. Okay, so it says that you can use parameter to specify both and sending and receiving computer to run the command in the background job. So you can do a set timeout and the number of pings, so you can do the count. Okay, and unlike the ping command, test connection return the command with the ping status. And so the parameters return true or false, and also system boolean object with the tested connection. So it's slightly different than your ping output, but it looks very close. Okay, so you can ping it, you can do test connection and another IP address, your own IP, or we can just do a loopback. So you're gonna see that it's gonna give you, now on the ping, it's gonna say how many packets it sent, how many received or lost, and there was timeout, and there would be time to live, right? On the test connection, it will tell you the source. And on this one, because we're using loopback, it gives you the system information, the system name. And then you are going to have the destination, which is your target IP that you put in. right? And then the IP address, the IP version 6, and then the bytes that were sent, and that was coming from the header, the ICMP header that it uses. Okay. All right. So what is the source? That will be your system name. Or host name, I should say. And then how many bytes were sent for each request? 32. Standard. So you can also use host name in your PowerShell. So we would say host name. That will be the same. And then we are going to do the host name with the test connection. Oh, what did I do? I think I put the underscore. Yep. Dash, not underscore. Sorry. So pretty much we are going to get the same thing. So that means that we can do it by the system name and the IP address. Okay. Now, if I wanted to change this up and I use my actual IP, 10.151.101.254, I'm still going to be able to get the same result. But in this one, look at, when you're using an IPv4 with the test connection, it doesn't give you the version 6. Okay? But if you use the name, it gives you the version 6 with it. Okay, because now you are in the IPv4 family, and it's only going to give you the IPv4 result and the destination. So it changes it up. So when you do a test connection with just system name, your source and destination is the same, right? Because I am using that system, right? But if you use another system name, let's say I'm using, Alma's computer's name, it's going to list only the names, okay, and the associated IP. Then on the IPv4, it's only going to give you the IPv4. Okay, so compare the output to the result. What's the same and different? Only IP, only system name were listed in source and destination. And then everything else is the same. So it converted the source and the destination addresses, right? Because we use the loopback, and so that's going to be in the destination. That's different. And then your source, since you're using the same computer there, from your system, it just lists the name. So. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm on number 6. I can't find my map yet.
For 6, hold on. Let me scroll up to 6.
It was the RS.
Oh yeah, we still haven't done the NetBios stat ARP. Okay, ARP, yeah, so you do the set. And then did you find your MAC address? Oh. Switch all. And then go to Ethernet 5 or 6.
Okay,
That's that one.
thank you.
Okay, I think the only one I left off was 9. We didn't do that earlier. because my command prompt was still going, right? So if it's this, if it's stopped like this, it could be that they don't have it resolved. So just close it and reopen. CMD. It's been more than 3 minutes or 300 seconds. So we would then do what was it? NetBT stat -R. So we would see that there is 13 registered by broadcast. And then you would have registered name server as 0. The reason why is that this system is on a work group. And so it doesn't have anything that would be for Wins or DNS on this. Okay. So I can safely say that for 9, I have 13 registered as broadcast, and then 0 for the name server. And sometimes some network, they don't support the Wins for the name server as well, because it is vulnerable, but you know, for legacy system, it's needed. However, not all networks have that supported. That role is enabled.
So what is it? But the less than sign was unexpected at this time.
Oh, yeah, so take out the IP. Yeah, take out the symbols. Oh, okay, the space. Three, type in the 3.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so you just use that. Yeah, I put the bracket, just those. There you go, it's set. Now you can just do the ARP G, or you can do the ARP with your IP, and then it would show your set. It's already been set, Cynthia. It's just, you know, that's redundant, right? Because your system already had that set. It already cached that. But in the case, let's say I'm forcing it to have an IP to a different MAC address, then I can do a set statically that way. Yeah, but your system had that cache already. Mhm. You're welcome. All right, any questions with this? Pretty easy today, just a lot of commands, right? And then just try to practice. So now if you're gonna go for the Microsoft certifications for their server series, which, you know, is recommended. I think we have some Certiport stuff for Microsoft that you can use. There is some PowerShell component in their new certifications. You know, so you have to be familiar with some of it, the basics at least. Okay. And then they also have the Hyper-V one separately, but for the administrator, I think they call it like the expert, the Microsoft expert professional or something like that. That one it requires that you have a little bit of PowerShell knowledge, along with the stuff we've been doing, configuring rules, and then a lot of the details about Microsoft, like partitioning, drives, services, and so on. Microsoft is easy. If you use it well, like long enough, you remember. That's how you're gonna remember. Well, I have the Certiport version for it. Yeah, so I think we have some licenses under Microsoft. They started taking off some of the things, but I think your associates is still there. I think one of the components is still there, and that expires in January. So far, not a lot of students have been using it, so I don't know if I can tell them to give me more money to be able to put into it. Like maybe one more round. But if you are doing like the CEH associates, you should take that one. That one that comes with the Certiport, so it's free for you to use. And then what's the other one? The forensic one. So after you take CS-27, you should study for that and take it. At least if they don't, if it's certified through Certiport, so Pearson VUE owns Certiport. And Pearson VUE does certification for everybody. Okay. All the certification mostly goes through, that's like an engine that does certifications. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, let me know. I don't have a proctor officially for. I did have 2 faculty, but this time we haven't been able to get some of the funding, but I might be able to find some money to pay them to you have to be proctored. You can do it virtually. So they just activate the test and then they're on Zoom with you, right? You just use a webcam and you can take it from home. But even if you don't pass, if you try, you would see how the test is like, and then
That's
go
true.
again, right?
Yeah.
I have 250 license for the CEH and the CFT one, and then 500 license for each of the Microsoft one, including Microsoft Office. That's a lot of students, they like to take those because, for the business side, it's good to have.
A lot of businesses use Microsoft.
80 to 90%. Yep. One way or another. Even if they sometimes use Linux web server, you would have, because other companies uses Microsoft. So in order to send your stuff that's accepted to other companies, and then now you start to see Mac and Linux and things like that, but they use like Microsoft products like Office, on Apple systems and things like that. Okay, any question on Zoom? Okay, so on Thursday, we are going to do FTP server and IIS server. So I'm going to give you web server. I love doing web server, even on Windows 10. A little bit of IIS, but we are going to install that on the server role officially, so you know how to do that, to make an FTP server with a web server so people can connect to it. But then you have to manage access. Okay, yeah. And then we are going to also do a file storage server with quota. So, like you would give everybody a certain amount of space to be able to upload their files and share it with their department. And then, if they reach a certain max space, you would use like an email system to send it. So with that will be also SMTP. So you can get a little bit more understanding on how to automate that. You know how that you always get the MVC all notification? Yeah, that's done through a server. But I'm not going to get into Exchange because that's the system administration class. And Exchange and SharePoint is its own thing. It's sometimes it's a headache, but it's good to know. Okay. All right. If you're done, submit. And have a wonderful evening. It's already 5 o'clock. I don't want to. Yep.
Are you gonna put up the assignment?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that tonight. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have things drafted and then I just haven't had time to finalize and upload. I'll put it up tonight. And then I'll get the videos up. I try not to do really long videos, but it's just hard to do little videos and then upload it because I use a software and it has to convert it to something to MP4, and that process does take a long time because it converts and upload it at the same time to YouTube. So it does take a little bit. So I'll get those up for you shortly. Let me stop recording.